Hi, folks, it's Matt here from the Ask the Arb podcast, and this is one of our episodes where we're going to have a guest on. And today I've got with us Robin Gamble, who is the director at UK Helix, which may sound really boring and it may not sound like it's something that you're particularly interested in. But if you are currently going through the planning system, and you've had a tree survey carried out and you're looking to put in things like garden buildings, shepherd's huts, glamping pods, things like that, in areas where there are trees, you are going to come across the requirement for helical or screw piles, and that's probably the only way you're going to achieve your planning consent. So obviously this is something that I've got a detailed knowledge of, but I realise not a lot of our listeners will do, but this is one that's definitely going to be worth a listen to. So Robin, welcome to the RCR podcast. Do you just want to give us a quick kind of high level overview of who you are, what UK Helix do, and how you've got to where you are today?
Sure, yeah, thank you for the introduction, Matt. Yes, so I'm the director of UK Helix, and we design, sell, install, and provide and sell machinery to install screw piles, which again doesn't sound very glamorous, but I think when people find out what the concept is, most people find it quite intriguing. It means you can have a foundation for your house with no digging, no concrete, no spoil removal, and potentially sort of 3, 4, 5 times faster than you would have a regular trench concrete footing, for example. So most of the time people come to us when they have some kind of problem, some kind of challenge, like you were saying, trees or maybe made ground, and they cannot get their project over the line unless they have some sort of deep foundation solution. So that's essentially what we do. We are an agent for a fabricator in Finland, so all of our product is produced in Finland. And once you get into this topic, you'll notice that the Nordic countries and places like Canada are quite advanced with this kind of technology because their ground is frozen for a lot of the year. So they have to have ways to overcome the frost. So yeah, that's what we do. We have a warehouse in mid Sussex. It's filled with screw piles, and when people need them, we get them anywhere in the UK within a couple of days, and help people get their projects over the line. Essentially, when they've got a problem, like you say, with planning or something like that.
And do you guys operate nationwide? Do you send your product out nationwide, do you?
Yes, we do. Yes. So yeah, up to Scotland, Wales. Lots of inquiries in Northern Ireland and Ireland. So yeah, that's one of the benefits as well. Is it's quite an easy product to move around. So a lot of the stuff we will send out on a pallet service. And we deal with everybody from someone who's trying to put up their shed quickly, and instead of wanting to do a concrete raft where they're going to have to get an excavator in, dig it all out, move all the topsoil, they just want to screw some piles in. So, and it'll be like a 1.2 meter pile. We'll send that out on a pallet with an electric handheld machine. They can do that of a Saturday or a Sunday, all the way up to we help facilitate the screw piling of a sub power station for the biggest solar field in the UK. So, and those are 12 meters deep and
Oh,
massive.
wow.
So we do everything from those extremes and everything in between. Yeah.
That's 12 meters deep. That's pretty impressive. And it's interesting that you mentioned at the start their houses as well, because I think probably the vast majority of our listeners will have come across screw piles being specified in relation mostly to garden buildings and lightweight structures. So this is something that can obviously be used to replace traditional strip foundations. And, I mean, if you're looking at 12 meter deep, I guess really, depending on the soil structure, there's no limit then, is there?
I would say I don't think we're quite at the place where we can stick the Empire State Building on screw piles. So those are for traditional CFA concrete piles. But we can go like 600 kilonewtons or above. So to give the listeners some sort of scope, I would say for a house, for a two-story house, we would do that like up to 150 kilonewton screw pile, which we have in stock. So we can go to 600 and above. So you can do big structures on screw piles for sure.
Yeah, and just, I mean, cost always comes into this, doesn't it? It's always part of the conversation. And what we found before, particularly with large, high-end garden buildings, is that it's actually worked out an awful lot cheaper than casting a concrete slab. And I mean, is that your experience as well?
It is my experience. I think one thing where the layperson can seem a bit hesitant is when they see sort of a unit price of a screw pile, and they might think, well, that seems quite expensive compared to, say, a bag of cement or something. But often what they're not factoring in is the speed. So there's the speed to contend with, because I met a partner of yours on a job, where it was a very large, it was a beautiful large garden room, more like a lodge. And we had the foundations done in half a day. And so they're building immediately. Immediately after those screw piles in, you can build on it. So I think that is a factor that needs to be thought about when you're costing these things. If you're doing a traditional footing, you're looking at potentially days, and then the concrete to set, and all that time is money, as they say. So,
And
but yeah, so it often does end up cheaper for sure.
it's one of those things, isn't it? You've just got to weigh it up, and for a lot of our listeners, it will be the only way that they can get their project over the ground, over the line, so to speak. And I guess it's probably worth just touching on the reasoning for that. So do you want to explain the arboricultural reasons for it, or shall I have a crack at it?
Well, I think you can probably laugh as I try and explain, because you're clearly the expert. But I can tell you the types of clients that we work with in the residential kind of area, and often what it is they have their heart set on an extension, or a garden room, and then they encounter trees perhaps within a few meters of that build, and building control basically sort of shut down that project, because any footings are potentially going to be disturbed by heave and by roots. So so whatever is put into the ground needs to go deep below that root activity, and that can completely shut down your extension. And it's really sad to see people when they get into this situation. Oftentimes they think there's no way around it. I've been on many case studies where people are told you have to go 3 meters, 4 meters, 5 meters, 6 meters deep in some case with one garden room, which they wanted to build around a tree.
Yeah.
So when you're told that, you're a little bit stuck about what you can do, because digging concrete footings to that depth becomes sort of unviable. So you can tell me, Matt, if I've summarised that well enough.
Yeah. So what Robin's touched on there really well is the issues around subsidence and heave. Without getting hyper technical, there might be some. In fact, one of my coaching clients is an arboricultural consultant, and he said to me that he's going to listen to this. But apart from that, everybody else, from a layman's sort of side, really, when we're talking about subsidence and heave, we're talking about movement in the soil, and we're talking about subsidence in particular is seasonal re-wetting of the soil. So essentially a tree acts like a giant pump. It sucks water out of the ground during the summer months when it's got a high demand, and then during the winter that soil tends to re-wet. And if the footings and foundations aren't deep enough, you can get movement in that building. Now, in theory, all buildings, I think, after around the early 1980s should have been built in such a way that they're not affected by subsidence. However, that's not always the case, and because building control in particular have a high awareness of subsidence and heave in relation to trees is contentious, and we won't go into it here. There is a school of thought that it's not really a thing. So that's where you remove the tree and the soil re-wets and creates issues. Now, what this essentially means is, as Robin's highlighted there, is that you could get your planning consent and then you could come to the stumbling block of building control. You turn around and say, well, hang on, there's a big conifer tree there, there's a big lime tree there. Different trees take different levels of water out of the ground and have different what are called influencing distances from that building. So depending on the species, depends on how close you can build to them, essentially. So there's that side of things, there's subsidence and heave. And then more importantly, what helical and screw piles allow us to do as arboricultural consultants is come up with a solution for construction within the root protection areas of trees. Root protection areas are a graphical representation of the below ground constraints on a development plan, and these root protection areas extend out different distances from the tree depending on the girth of the tree. It's not an absolute science. Root morphology is really, really complicated, and it's altered by things like hard standing and soil structure and all sorts. So you talk about going down 6 meters. I think Peter, who you met on that particular job, was in central London. He found tree roots from a plane tree 15, 16 meters down in an excavation. So it's because roots are advantageous and they'll seek out the best growing conditions. People see images of trees below ground drawn like a wine glass, where you've got, the top, the crown of the tree, and it all comes out level and flat. The reality is it's not like that at all. It's very, very complex. So if, when you're going through the planning process, your development goes into the root protection area, you're not going to be allowed by the local planning authority to have traditional strip foundations where it's excavated and backfilled with concrete. Because the excavation can damage the tree roots, sever them, kill the tree, make it unstable, and also leachates from the concrete as well can also potentially damage the tree. So your only option is to have piles and a beam, essentially. And some garden buildings, I mentioned those towards the start of the podcast, they're often entirely in the root protection area of a tree. Different local planning authorities have different appetites as to what they'll stomach. Some will have a sort of pragmatic approach to it, because you can end up with a void beneath the floor of the building. So if it's a residential extension, that can be an issue, because you've got the existing floor level, and then potentially there might be a step up into the excavation, into the extension if you're using piles. So think of piles as a way of facilitating development within the root protection area of trees, but only some developments are suitable for that. And I'm sure you've got experience of a wide sweeping range. So I've gone off on a massive ramble there, but that's because I've not talked about trees for quite some time now in my role within the company. So
you're wetting your whistle. You're just getting going.
Yeah, that's it. So talk me through sort of, if you were doing sort of a piling project for a single story residential extension. I mean, can they be used for 2-story residential extensions?
Yes.
They can.
Yes, yeah, they can. It's just weighing up the loads. So obviously the loads that have to go into these piles, and we can spec bigger piles. I think the thing with doing extensions is there's often an access factor, to put in there, which will limit the size of machinery that you can get in there. But what we can normally do is have a dialogue with the engineers, and sometimes we can just decrease the loads by putting in more piles, by putting in more locations. So absolutely, we've done houses, we've done 2-story houses, we've done 2-story extensions, all manner of construction. It's just normally with those things, it's just finding the balance of the loads and then the type of machinery that needs to get in and do the job. Yeah.
And do you guys, you'll get involved in the design of those foundations, or will you work with a structural engineer, will you?
We actually have a deep foundation specialist that we work with, and he's he's very enjoyable to work with. He's super knowledgeable. He has a PhD and he goes and lectures on deep
Right.
foundations around the world. So if there's something that needs like a specific pile design, we'll get our engineer on board and we can produce a screw pile design for them. But what people need to know about screw piling, because when I first got into this, it just made so much sense. There's no digging, there's no concrete, there's no muck away. I was like, why doesn't everybody do this for everything? Plus, there's a reduction in the carbon footprint of like 50 to 80% versus concrete. So, and this is the way we all want to move, isn't it? I think. I'm pretty sure most of us don't want to pour more and more concrete in the ground. And it's worth noting why we don't want to do that. And that's because it produces an incredible amount of carbon to produce cement. Like it's 1 ton of carbon for a ton of cement. So we want to do things a little bit more sustainably moving forward. However, there are like limitations to screw piles. We can't go through bedrock, for example. So if you've got actual bedrock like 500 mil below your topsoil, unfortunately we can't go through that. Or if the ground is filled with massive chunks of mudstone or sandstone, like meter long chunks, we can't go through that either. So there are some things that we need to do before we can screw pile for someone, and that is normally we need like a soil investigation or a ground investigation. But luckily there's enough for most people to get an idea whether it's viable online. I guess you probably know that there's a national borehole database.
Yeah, certainly we do, and our arboricultural consultants use that data all the time. The listeners won't necessarily be aware of it, but yeah.
It's so cool. I couldn't believe that was free for everyone to access. You just put in your postcode, and you can find boreholes all normally within about sort of a few hundred meters of your location, and that will very often tell you what the ground is like where you are. So you should know if you're on a load of sandstone, mudstone or something like that. But clay is great for us, chalk is great for us, sand, we can deal with gravel. I mean, whole of London is on like London clay, so that's where we do loads and loads of work. Chalk is really nice. So there's lots of stuff we can do, and there's lots of areas where any other form of foundation just sort of becomes unviable, like where it's made ground for like 3 or 4 meters. So there's no load bearing capacity in that 3 meters. You're going to have to get into something good, and that's where we sort of come into our own. Or if recently a very big project next to a river where it's all alluvium, it's basically the ground is like slop, it's like sludge for like 10 meters you've got before you get to anything good. So we come into our own there as well. So when I first got into this, I was like, this must be the answer for everything. And then obviously as you learn more, you're like, okay, well, we've got limitations and stuff we can do and stuff we can't do. But when the conditions are right, and you see a good screw piling job, it looks like magic because it's done so quickly and smoothly. So
I've been in this game as a consultant since 2008, 2009, something like that. And the amount of projects that have been facilitated through screw piles, it's literally been the only way it can be done. And ranging from everything, I think I've only been involved in one sort of residential extension. It's mostly been new buildings, mostly timber framed buildings in difficult scenarios. But one particular one jumps to mind, which was it was an urgently needed extension to a local authority nursery, and the only place they could extend was into this area of protected, so the trees had tree preservation orders on it, which is worth bearing in mind for the listeners. If you've got a TPA protected tree, this is something that will be viewed more favourably as a solution, and it was the only way they could construct the building, and they were absolutely delighted. And I think they've been working with an architect and a quantity surveyor, and they had a very, very tight timeline, as I recall. And when they found out they didn't need to cast a concrete slab, they were absolutely delighted because that made the project a little bit cheaper as well. So it did. I can't stress how life-changing these things can be, these innocuous little things can be, or big things in some instances can be for working around trees and sensitive habitats as well, wet ground and all that kind of good stuff.
It does sound hyperbolic to say it's life-changing, but I have been on jobs where the homeowners are literally like they're just at their wits' end.
Yeah.
Because they just want to get their extension done so their kid can have a place to sleep, and it's been going on for years. And then when you give them a solution that will overcome this tree issue that they have, so, I've had clients that have like been close to tears because they're just so relieved to finally get this thing over the line. So yeah, there's many situations where it's the only thing that will make a job viable, and that's really cool. It's really cool to be able to be part of that, and it's also good to be in partnership with, I'm going to say this right, arboriculturalists.
Yeah.
Did I get it?
Tree people. Yeah.
Oh yeah, tree people, because it seems to be the only thing that they are that generally they're okay about, because of things that you mentioned, like the leaking of the concrete and the destruction of roots and such. So
so in most scenarios, particularly residential scenarios, you're talking about quite small diameter piles, not necessarily particularly big. So therefore, the installation equipment, it's possible to get it in there. It's possible to get it in there on ground boarding, on a compressible layer of wood chips, so you don't get this compaction and erosion. So you guys can literally get in there, do your thing and get out. And then actually the problems generally come with the builders. they're usually the ones that
the next problem.
mix up concrete and put bags of gravel within root protection areas and things like that. But the screw piling contractors generally, they're used to working around trees. And it's funny you should mention homeowners being in tears, because we did actually have that scenario. There was a chap, and the house was on London clay. I think it was only just outside the M25, but it was on London clay. And he had a semi-detached house that he needed to extend because he had a disabled child, and they needed to have hoists and all sorts of stuff. And the step up wouldn't have necessarily been an issue, but his initial starting problem was the tree. And then when we started to do the investigation around the tree, he found out that his house was built on piles, and he didn't actually even know that, because it was on clay, and there was all sorts of subsidence issues and all sorts. So the extension had to be, built in a specific way. So yeah, it's really, really valuable. We could talk about piles all day, couldn't we? We really could. So obviously you guys, it's not just residential projects you're getting involved in, large scale commercial projects, solar farms, 5G mast installations, anything really that needs foundations. It's worth having a conversation with you. Would that be fair?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a very big push in the UK at the moment with BESS, battery energy storage systems, and I think so. This is, I'm pretty sure, is to do with shoring up our energy over the mid and long term, because I think we've experienced how we can be a bit susceptible to that. So there's lots of battery storage going up all around the UK, and they're basically big containers. There's battery in big containers, and it's a no-brainer. It's the fastest way that you can roll these things out, is to put them on screw piles. So we do a lot of that. We do solar. We do lots of residential. We do commercial. Yeah, marine.
And Robin, if people want to get in contact with you, I'll put your contact details in the description. But nobody ever looks at the description, whereas they will still be listening to the audio. So yeah, how do people get in contact with you?
ukhelix.com.
Perfect.
ukhelix.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Robin Gamble. UK Helix. You should be able to find me. Yeah.
Excellent, brilliant. Well, thanks for coming on, Robin. It's been really good to have a bit of a deep dive into a subject which initially sounds very dry, but actually could be the solution to everybody's problems. So, yeah, thanks a lot for coming on, and I will speak to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Cheers.